Jennifer Duffy, Senior Editor with Cook Political Report. So glad you could join us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
We would just love to get some insight about the upcoming midterm elections. So I know you're tracking a number of different races across the country. What are some of the highlights and standout races that you're tracking?
You know, I've done this for a long time, and so every cycle I have between 70 and 80 races to watch. So the bar for what I think is interesting is kind of high. So I like things that don't fit the norm, don't do what we expect them to do. So I think that the Texas Senate race is fascinating, that Ted Cruz has a really competitive challenge from Beto O'Rourke, who's running a very unique campaign. And if it succeeds, is he now not only a new face of the Democratic Party, but has he set new standards for how campaigns are run? South Dakota, the South Dakota governor's race is tied. South Dakota is a very red state. I can't remember the last time they had a Democratic governor, but the Democrat there is a very interesting guy. He's 34 years old, state senator, paraplegic. He was injured in a rodeo accident, and a moderate, which is good, but he looks like South Dakota. He sounds like South Dakota, and he's got a really strong message. So there's a race that's tied that shouldn't be. So those are the kind of races I like to watch.
Very interesting. So of course there's a lot of attention here in Arizona. We have an open U.S. Senate seat. We have Congresswoman Martha McSally and Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema. You know, recent polling shows that it's neck and neck. So what's kind of your insight on that race?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think that the parties agree that it's a very, very close race. They disagree on who's ahead by a point and who's behind by a point. Turnout is so important in this race, and it's really going to decide it. You've got two really strong candidates here that have good stories to tell. You know, Sinema got a head start because McSally had to deal with a primary, and that gave her a bit of an edge at the start of the general election. But I think McSally's brought it back to even. I made a prediction on Meet the Press Daily this week that it would be the closest race in the country.
Wow.
The closest Senate race in the country.
Interesting. So we'll see what happens in the next few weeks.
You know, Chuck Todd said he wouldn't hold me to it, but I told him it was something I was willing to stand by.
So as you're looking at these races across the nation, you know, Arizona, Texas, you mentioned some of the stuff happening in South Dakota. We know things change week by week. So what goes into determining if you're going to change the rating of a race?
Well, you know, part of, as I say, the joy of being me is that I'm not really a journalist, I'm an analyst, which means that I get to have conversations with people that are on background or off the record, and that provide me with information that I don't necessarily share. But when I hear party polling, I'm paying very little attention to public polls this cycle, especially at the state level, because they were so off in 2016. But the parties are polling, they're polling daily. If they can share some impressions of that data with me, that goes into it. Events go into it. I mean, sometimes when I see a party go on television in a place they shouldn't have to, or that tells me that there's something going on there that isn't necessarily visible to the naked eye, and I start asking some questions. And frankly, you know, I've been doing this for a really long time, and campaigns come and go, but the infrastructure around them tends to stay around, and so people's credibility is important to them, and they know that I take credibility very seriously.
Of course. And so kind of piggybacking on that, there's been a lot of conversation about a blue wave in the recent months, that Democrats are much more energetic this cycle than Republicans, and I think people saw that in some of the prior elections. Do you still see that trend continuing, especially since we're only a few weeks out from the general?
You know, I think it's interesting that waves come in different sizes, which I think people forget. And, you know, there's going to be some kind of a wave, say, if Democrats take the House. Is it going to be the kind of massive wave that flips the Senate, that flips a lot of legislative chambers and a lot of gubernatorial races? Probably not. One, because this is the tale of two elections. If you just look at the battle for the Senate, it looks so much different than the battle for the House or the battle for governorships because of the map. I mean, Democrats are on the defensive in the Senate. They are defending their seats in very red states. That's becoming a problem. Democrats have enjoyed a big intensity gap, both measured in polling, measured in primary turnout. The interesting thing about Kavanaugh's nomination is that it has really riled up Republicans, and we're seeing that gap beginning to shrink. The challenge for Republicans is maintaining that for the next 4.5 weeks.
So what are your predictions when it comes to the House and Senate, some of these gubernatorial races? Are we going to see both chambers flip one?
I think that the odds are more likely than not that the House will flip. They are on the defensive in so many seats, including Arizona 2, Martha McSally's open seat, where we're putting a thumb on the scale for Democrat Ann Kirkpatrick. They have so many seats to defend. The question is, how big is the Democratic majority going to be? Is it going to be 5 seats? Is it going to be 20 seats? Is it going to be 30 seats? That we don't know so much now. I actually think Republicans do maintain their majority in the Senate, and it's probably the majority they have right now, 51-49, which is remarkable when you consider that $1 billion will be spent on Senate races. Republicans will lose a handful of governorships, someplace between 5 and 9 of them, because Republicans hold 33 governor's seats right now. They have no place to go but down. The big question in my mind, and this is where we might measure waves, is what happens in state legislatures.
I guess we'll wait and see what happens the next 4 weeks. Jennifer Duffy, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.